The morning light filtered through Metropolitan High School's tall windows like a promise of possibility. Maya Richardson adjusted her backpack straps and checked her phone. 7:47 a.m. Right on time. She learned years ago that punctuality was armor for black students navigating predominantly white academic spaces. Being early meant fewer questions, fewer assumptions, fewer opportunities for someone to decide she didn't belong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Girl, you see Miss Peterson added another reading to the AP Gov syllabus? Jessica Martinez appeared beside Maya's locker, her own arms laden with textbooks. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her uniform blazer looked as crisp as Maya's. They'd mastered the art of looking unimpeachable together. Maya groaned softly. The Federalist Papers weren't enough torture? She switched her debate notes to her left hand and spun her combination lock with practiced efficiency. I swear she thinks we don't have other classes. Speaking of which, Jessica lowered her voice conspiratorially. How's the Georgetown application looking? Early admission deadline's coming up fast. The question sent a familiar flutter through Maya's chest. Georgetown's summer program for high school students interested in law and public policy. It felt like reaching for starlight. Brilliant, distant, maybe impossible. But her mother had taught her to reach anyway. Mom's helping me with the essay tonight after her case review. Maya pulled out her chemistry textbook, its weight familiar and grounding. She's got some federal prosecutor insight that might help. Whisso, your mom is so badass. Mine would just tell me to pray harder and study more. Maya smiled, but something in her chest tightened. Her mother was badass. Angela Richardson could dismantle a defense attorney's argument like unwrapping a present, precise and devastating. But Maya had learned that her mother's power in federal courtrooms didn't necessarily translate to protection in high school hallways. Some spaces had their own rules, their own hierarchies of who mattered and who didn't. Down the hallway, Maya caught sight of Officer Derek Sullivan checking IDs at the main entrance. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his badge catching the fluorescent light as he gestured for a freshman to empty his pockets. The boy, Marcus Maya thought his name was, complied quickly, his shoulders hunched with the particular anxiety of being singled out. "You see that?" Jessica murmured, following Maya's gaze. Maya nodded. Marcus was black, like half the school's population, but somehow the random searches always seemed to randomly select the same demographic. The statistics were buried in administrative reports that few parents read, couched in language about maintaining safe learning environments and proactive security measures. Her phone buzzed, a text from her little brother Elijah. Mom said Officer Sullivan might get transferred to Jefferson Middle School next year. That true? Maya's stomach dropped. Elijah was 13, all knees and elbows and nervous energy about starting high school. The thought of him navigating Sullivan's particular brand of authority made her throat tight. "Don't worry about rumors," she texted back. "Focus on your algebra test." "Everything okay?" Jessica asked, noticing Maya's expression. "Just Elijah being Elijah." Maya slipped her phone into her blazer pocket. "He heard Sullivan might transfer to his school." Jessica's face darkened. "That man has no business around middle schoolers. Hell, he has no business around any kids." Maya glanced around automatically, checking who might overhear. The habit was so ingrained she barely noticed doing it anymore. The constant calculation of which truths were safe to speak out loud, which observations might be labeled as attitude or making trouble. The first bell chimed, and the hallway erupted into organized chaos. Students streamed toward their first period classes, a river of navy blazers and pressed khakis. Maya and Jessica joined the flow, their conversation shifting to safer topics: the upcoming debate tournament, Jessica's stress about the SATs, whether they'd have time to grab lunch together. But as they walked, Maya's awareness stayed heightened, attuned to the subtle dynamics playing out around them. The way certain teachers smiled differently at certain students. The way hall passes were requested and granted or denied. The way security cameras seemed to track some paths more closely than others. At the main office, Principal Margaret Caldwell reviewed the morning reports on her computer screen. Disciplinary statistics glowed in neat columns. Suspensions up 12% from last quarter, with a familiar pattern in the demographic breakdown. She frowned slightly, not at the disparity, but at the potential for questions. The school board was increasingly interested in equity metrics, and these numbers might require explanation. Her assistant knocked and entered. "The morning briefing with Officer Sullivan is ready, Principal Caldwell." Caldwell nodded and straightened her blazer. Sullivan was thorough, she'd give him that. Maintained order effectively. Some parents complained about his methods, but those same parents often failed to teach their children proper respect for authority. Different cultural approaches to discipline, she reasoned. The officer understood how to communicate in language these students responded to. Meanwhile, 23 floors above the city in a federal building downtown, Angela Richardson stood before a judge, her voice steady and uncompromising as she outlined the prosecution's case against a police sergeant who'd beaten a suspect during a traffic stop. The defendant sat at the defense table, his uniform replaced by an ill-fitting suit, his confidence eroded months of depositions and evidence review.
"Your Honor," Angela said, "the defendant's assertion that his actions were justified fails on multiple grounds. The video evidence clearly shows." She'd built her career on cases like this: civil rights violations, abuse of power, the intersection of authority and accountability. Each conviction sent a message that federal law applied to everyone, that badges didn't confer immunity from justice. Her phone sat silently on her desk back at the office, set to forward only urgent calls. At 2:30, she had a parent-teacher conference at Maya's school to discuss AP course selections for senior year. It was the kind of routine parental duty that grounded her, reminded her that all her professional battles were ultimately about creating a world where her children could thrive. Coach Robert Jenkins unlocked the gymnasium equipment room and began setting up for first period PE. Through the wire-reinforced windows, he could see Officer Sullivan at his usual post near the main hallway intersection. Jenkins had coached at Metropolitan High for 8 years, long enough to notice patterns that troubled him. Last week, Sullivan had pulled aside Terrence Williams for uniform violations, his shirt untucked, which somehow required a 20-minute discussion in the hallway while Sullivan lectured about respect and responsibility. Terrence was a sophomore, honor roll, never caused problems, but he was also tall for his age, black, and apparently looked suspicious to Sullivan's trained eye. Jenkins had wanted to intervene, but what would he say? Sullivan outranked him in the school's unofficial hierarchy, carried the authority of law enforcement, and Jenkins couldn't afford to make waves, not when he was one of only 3 black male teachers in the school, when his job felt perpetually precarious despite his performance reviews and student evaluations. The morning announcements crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, Metropolitan High School. Today is Tuesday, October 10th. Please remember that all students must carry hall passes when moving through the building during class periods." Maya half-listened as she organized her chemistry notes. The reminder about hall passes was routine, but it carried weight in this building. She'd heard too many stories about students questioned, searched, or detained for being in hallways without proper documentation. The policy applied to everyone technically, but enforcement seemed curiously selective. The second bell rang, and Maya gathered her materials for AP Chemistry. She had a free period after lunch, planned to spend it in the library working on her debate case about criminal justice reform. The irony wasn't lost on her, researching arguments about police accountability while navigating a school where Officer Sullivan's authority went unquestioned. As she walked toward the science wing, Maya passed Sullivan in the main hallway. He was checking his radio, adjusting his utility belt, preparing for another day of maintaining order. Their eyes met briefly, his suspicious and assessing, hers carefully neutral. She nodded politely, the way her mother had taught her to acknowledge authority figures, respect without submission, acknowledgement without fear. Sullivan watched her go, noting the expensive blazer, the confident posture, the way she carried herself like she belonged. Something about her attitude rubbed him wrong, though he couldn't articulate exactly what. Maybe it was the way she looked him in the eye instead of looking down. Maybe it was the sense that she saw through his authority to something smaller underneath. The morning proceeded normally. Classes, hallway transitions, the comfortable rhythm of academic life. Maya excelled in chemistry, contributed thoughtfully to her literature discussion, took detailed notes in AP history. Jessica documented their day and carefully curated Instagram stories, the kind of content that made their school look diverse and dynamic. Neither girl could have predicted that by afternoon, everything would change, that Maya's next encounter with Officer Sullivan would transform her from honor student to national symbol, would test every lesson her mother had taught her about dignity under pressure, would prove that sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough to stay safe. The lunch bell was still 2 hours away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The fourth period bell released students into the hallways like water breaking through a dam. Maya gathered her government textbook and notes, checking her phone as she prepared for her free period. Her mother had confirmed their 2:30 conference about AP courses for senior year. Just another routine parent meeting in what was supposed to be a routine day. Maya's destination was the library, where she planned to research precedent cases for the debate tournament. Her topic? Resolved that the use of police in schools does more harm than good to student learning environments. The irony felt sharp as she walked through hallways patrolled by Officer Sullivan, but Maya had learned to find power in studying the systems that constrained her. She pulled out her hall pass, properly signed by Mr. Hendricks, clearly dated and timed. She slipped it into her blazer pocket where it would be easily accessible. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Always have your documentation ready. Make their job easy when they're doing it right. Make their case impossible when they're doing it wrong." Halfway down the main hallway, Maya paused to text her mother. "Conference still at 2:30? Working on debate research until then."
The reply came quickly. "Yes, looking forward to it. How's your day going?" Maya started typing back when she became aware of footsteps approaching from behind, deliberate and purposeful. She finished her text, "Good so far," and hit send before turning around. Officer Derek Sullivan stood 6 feet away, his hand resting on his radio. At 42, he carried himself with the particular authority of someone who'd learned that intimidation was more efficient than conversation. His eyes swept over Maya with practiced suspicion, taking in her posture, her phone, her presence in the hallway during class time. "Excuse me," Sullivan said, his tone carrying the weight of automatic assumption. "Where are you supposed to be right now?" Maya slipped her phone into her pocket and met his gaze directly. "I'm heading to the library, Officer Sullivan. I have a free period this block." "Hall pass." The demand was curt, bureaucratic. Maya reached into her blazer pocket and produced the pass, holding it out for inspection. Sullivan took it, examining the signature and timestamp with exaggerated thoroughness. "What's this about?" He pointed to her phone, which had buzzed with another message from her mother. "Texting my mom about our parent conference this afternoon." Maya's voice remained level, respectful, but not subservient. She'd practiced this tone in her mother's mirror, professional enough to demand respect, deferential enough to avoid being labeled as having an attitude. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. Something about her composure irritated him. The way she answered questions without the nervous fidgeting he expected from students caught in minor infractions. Girls like her always thought they were smarter than the system, always had explanations ready. "Conferences are scheduled through the main office," Sullivan said, handing back her pass with deliberate slowness. "You sure you're not making arrangements to skip class?" Maya felt the familiar weight of being guilty until proven innocent,
the exhausting burden of having her truthfulness questioned simply for existing in space while black. But her mother's training held. Document everything, stay calm, know your rights. You can check with the main office, Maya said, evenly. Mrs. Rodriguez scheduled it last week for 2:30 p.m. Angela Richardson, my mother. Around the corner, Jessica Martinez was walking to her next class when she heard Officer Sullivan's voice carrying down the hallway. Something in his tone made her pause and peer around the corner. When she saw Maya standing under Sullivan's scrutiny, every instinct screamed, danger. Jessica pulled out her phone and opened her camera app, positioning herself where she could record without being immediately noticed. Sullivan stepped closer to Maya, close enough that she could smell his aftershave and see the small scar on his chin. "Let me see that phone." "Is there a specific reason you need to see my phone?" "Don't question my authority, young lady." Sullivan's voice rose slightly, and Maya became aware of other students in the hallway slowing down, sensing tension. "When I ask for something, you hand it over." Maya thought of her mother in federal courtrooms facing down hostile judges and defense attorneys with quiet dignity. She thought of the lessons learned at kitchen table conversations about constitutional rights and institutional power. She thought of her little brother Elijah, who would enter this building next year and might face this same officer. "Officer Sullivan," Maya said, carefully, "I understand you have authority in this school, but I also know that searches require reasonable suspicion of doing wrong. I've shown you my hall pass, explained where I'm going, and I haven't violated any school policies. Unless you can articulate a specific concern, I'd prefer to continue to the library." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Maya had just cited policy, had just implied that Sullivan might be overstepping his authority. In his mind, that was an act of rebellion deserving immediate correction. From her position around the corner, Jessica started recording. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone steady, but she understood the importance of documentation. She'd seen too many situations where official accounts contradicted witness memories, where authority figures rewrote narratives to protect themselves. Coach Jenkins emerged from the gymnasium, heading toward the main office with attendance sheets. He caught sight of the confrontation and felt his stomach drop. Maya Richardson, honor student, debate team captain, one of the most respectful kids in the building, standing under Sullivan's aggressive questioning. He slowed his pace, torn between intervention and self-preservation. "You think you're a lawyer now?" Sullivan's voice carried acid mockery. "Think you can lecture me about reasonable suspicion? Girls like you always think they know better than the people trying to keep you safe." Maya felt the phrase, "girls like you," hit like a physical blow. The coded language of bias, the reduction of her individual worth to demographic assumptions. But she held her ground, her mother's voice steady in her mind. "Stay calm, document everything, make them show the world who they really are." "I'm not lecturing anyone," Maya replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm simply asking that you follow the same policies you enforce with other students." Sullivan's hand moved to his utility belt, fingers brushing the handcuffs clipped there. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable, a reminder of the power dynamics at play, the institutional force backing his authority.
"Empty your backpack," Sullivan ordered. "Right here, right now."
Maya's composure cracked slightly. This was escalation without justification, fishing expedition disguised as security protocol. She glanced around the hallway, noting the students who had stopped to watch, the phones emerging from pockets. "Officer Sullivan, I need to understand what policy I violated that justifies a search of my personal belongings." "Your attitude is what's violating policy," Sullivan snapped. "Your refusal to comply with direct orders, your assumption that you can question my judgment." The accusations were circular,
self-reinforcing. Maya's calm responses were reframed as defiance, her knowledge of rights reinterpreted as disrespect. She was being criminalized for the very qualities, intelligence, composure, dignity, that should have protected her. Jessica's livestream was attracting viewers now. She'd shared it quickly across her social media, and comments were beginning to appear. Is this really happening? Someone needs to help her. This is 2025, not 1955. Coach Jenkins found himself walking closer, his attendance sheets forgotten. He couldn't watch a student, especially Maya Richardson, be humiliated without at least bearing witness. His presence might not stop anything, but it would create another adult witness to whatever was about to unfold. "Ma'am," Sullivan said, the word dripping with false respect, "for the last time, empty that backpack or I'll empty it for you." Maya looked at the growing crowd of students, at Coach Jenkins hovering uncertainly nearby, at the phones documenting every word. She thought of her mother's federal cases, how video evidence had been crucial in prosecuting officers who abused their power. She thought of Elijah, potentially facing this same treatment next year. "Officer Sullivan, I need to understand what policy I violated that justifies a search of my personal belongings." "Your attitude is what's violating policy," Sullivan snapped. "Your refusal to comply with direct orders. Your assumption that you can question my judgment." The accusations were circular, self-reinforcing. Maya's calm responses were reframed as defiance, her knowledge of rights reinterpreted as disrespect. She was being criminalized for the very qualities, intelligence, composure, dignity, that should have protected her. Jessica's livestream was attracting viewers now. She'd shared it quickly across her social media, and comments were beginning to appear. "Is this really happening? Someone needs to help her. This is 2025, not 1955. Is this really happening? Someone needs to help her. This is 2025, not 1955. Coach Jenkins found himself walking closer, his attendance sheets forgotten. He couldn't watch a student, especially Maya Richardson, be humiliated without at least bearing witness. His presence might not stop anything, but it would create another adult witness to whatever was about to unfold. "Ma'am," Sullivan said, the word dripping with false respect, "for the last time, empty that backpack or I'll empty it for you." Maya looked at the growing crowd of students, at Coach Jenkins hovering uncertainly nearby, at the phones documenting every word. She thought of her mother's federal cases, how video evidence had been crucial in prosecuting officers who abused their power. She thought of Elijah, potentially facing the same treatment next year. "Officer Sullivan, I need to know what policy I have violated that justifies a search of my personal belongings." Every word was chosen carefully, creating an audio record that would be impossible to misinterpret later. Maya was performing perfect compliance while exposing procedural violations, turning Sullivan's aggression into evidence of bias. Sullivan's face flushed red. The crowd was growing, phones were recording, and this student was making him look incompetent with her careful citations of policy. His authority was being undermined by a 16-year-old girl who had the audacity to know her rights. "You think you're smart?" Sullivan stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried down the hallway. "You think knowing a few rules makes you untouchable? Let me teach you something about the real world." His hand moved toward Maya's arm, and Jessica's finger tightened on the record button. Coach Jenkins started forward, finally choosing courage over caution. The hallway fell silent except for the soft electronic chimes of notification alerts from multiple phones. Maya looked directly into Sullivan's eyes and spoke clearly enough for every camera to capture. "Officer Sullivan, you are about to make a choice that will define both of our futures. I hope you choose wisely." The moment stretched like a wire under tension, pregnant with possibilities that could reshape everything that came after. In federal courtrooms across the country, prosecutors built careers on moments like this, when authority figures revealed their true character under pressure, when institutional power met individual dignity, when the whole system balanced on a single decision. Sullivan's hand closed around Maya's wrist. The metallic crash echoed through Metropolitan High School's main hallway like a gunshot. Maya Richardson's body hit the row of lockers with enough force to dent the steel, her head snapping back against the ventilation grate with a sound that made students gasp and step backwards instinctively. "I am not resisting," Maya said clearly, her voice steady despite the pain radiating through her skull and the taste of copper in her mouth. Her hands remained visible, palms open, even as Officer Sullivan's grip on her wrist tightened enough to leave marks. "I showed you my hall pass. You are hurting me." Sullivan's face was flushed crimson, his breathing heavy with exertion and rage. The composed 16-year-old's refusal to cower, her continued articulation of rights and procedures, felt like mockery of his authority. Every calm word she spoke was another challenge that demanded correction. "Stop resisting," he shouted, though Maya's hands had never moved from their visible position, though her voice had never risen above conversational volume. He yanked her away from the lockers and forced her toward the floor, his knee pressing into her back as she went down. Jessica Martinez's phone captured everything from around the corner, her live stream now drawing viewers from across social media platforms. Comments flooded the screen faster than she could read them. "Call the police. Someone help her. This is insane. Is this real?" Her hands trembled as she held the device steady, understanding instinctively that this footage might be the only protection Maya had. "I can't breathe," Maya gasped, Sullivan's weight pressing down on her spine. The words carried terrible historical resonance, echoing across decades of similar moments that had ended in tragedy. But Maya's mother had taught her well. Even while being brutalized, she continued to create an impeachable record. "I am not resisting. I am complying with your orders. You are hurting me."
Coach Robert Jenkins had been walking toward the confrontation when Sullivan slammed Maya into the lockers. The sound galvanized him like an electric shock. 8 years of careful institutional navigation, of keeping his head down and avoiding conflicts with authority figures, shattered in an instant. "Sullivan, stop!" Jenkins' voice cracked with horror and recognition. He'd seen this pattern before, had chosen silence before, but watching Maya Richardson pinned to the floor by a grown man's knee broke something fundamental inside him. "Get off that child!" Sullivan looked up, his eyes wild with adrenaline and defensive fury. "Stay back, Jenkins. This individual was resisting arrest, threatening an officer." "Arrest?" Jenkins stepped closer, his voice rising in disbelief. "For what? Walking to the library with a hall pass?" The growing crowd of students pressed against the hallway walls, phones out, some crying, others frozen in shock. The assault had lasted 47 seconds so far, but it felt eternal, a slow-motion nightmare unfolding under fluorescent lights. Maya forced her voice to remain clear despite the pressure on her lungs. "My name is Maya Richardson. I am 16 years old. I was walking to the library during my free period with a properly signed hall pass. I have not threatened anyone or committed any crime. Officer Sullivan is using excessive force without justification." Every word was chosen for maximum legal clarity, creating testimony that no defense attorney could twist or misinterpret. Angela Richardson's daughter was building her own prosecution case in real time, turning trauma into evidence with heartbreaking precision. Assistant Principal James Thornton arrived at a brisk walk, alerted by the commotion and the sight of students clustering around something in the main hallway. When he saw Sullivan kneeling on Maya's back, his first instinct wasn't protection of the student, it was damage control for the institution. "What's the situation here?" Thornton asked Sullivan, taking a tone that suggested he was seeking an explanation he could defend, rather than investigating potential wrongdoing. "Uncooperative student, suspected of skipping class, refused to comply with search procedures," Sullivan replied without lifting his knee from Maya's back. "Standard restraint protocol for non-compliant individuals." Jenkins stared at Thornton in disbelief. "Standard protocol? James, this is Maya Richardson, honor roll student, debate team captain. She was walking to the library with a hall pass and he assaulted her for asking him to follow proper search procedures." Maya managed to turn her head slightly, blood from the cut on her forehead smearing against the tile floor. "Mr. Thornton," she said with devastating calm, "I need medical attention. Officer Sullivan has injured me without cause. I also need you to call my mother.
Angela Richardson, federal prosecutor. She'll want to know that a school resource officer has assaulted her daughter for exercising constitutional rights. The phrase federal prosecutor hit Thornton like cold water. His eyes widened as he processed the implications. This wasn't just a routine disciplinary incident. This was a potential federal civil rights case involving someone with the expertise and authority to prosecute it. Jessica's livestream had exploded to over 300 viewers, with shares multiplying across platforms. Her classmates were recording from multiple angles, creating a documentary record that no official narrative could contradict. The notification sounds from their phones created a constant electronic chorus of alerts, shares, and comments. Sullivan finally released the pressure on Maya's back, but his hand remained on her shoulder, keeping her prone on the floor. "She's fine," he told Thornton dismissively. "Little cut on the forehead, nothing serious. Some people bruise easily when they resist arrest." Maya slowly pushed herself up to her knees, her movements careful and deliberate. Blood had dried on her forehead, and her wrist bore clear finger-shaped bruises where Sullivan had grabbed her. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who understood exactly what had just happened and what it meant. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, looking directly at him, despite the pain in her head, "you just assaulted a minor for the crime of being black in a hallway. You violated my constitutional rights, school policy, and basic human decency, and you did it in front of dozens of witnesses with cameras." The hallway fell silent except for the distant sound of classes in session, normal academic life continuing while something fundamental had been broken in the main corridor. Students stood frozen, phones still recording, understanding they'd witnessed something that would change everything. Sullivan stood up slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake, but his training and temperament pushed him toward doubling down rather than backing off. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, interference with school security, and assaulting an officer," he announced, reaching for his handcuffs. "I never touched you," Maya replied immediately, her voice clear enough for every camera to capture. "Everyone here saw what happened. I never raised my hands, never raised my voice, never threatened you in any way. The only assault in this hallway was committed by you." Coach Jenkins positioned himself between Sullivan and Maya, his career-preserving caution finally overcome by moral necessity. "That's enough, Derek. This child needs medical attention, not handcuffs." Thornton fumbled for his radio, finally beginning to grasp that this situation was spiraling beyond his ability to manage. "Security to the main office. We need the nurse to the main hallway immediately."
Jessica stopped recording and immediately began uploading the footage to multiple platforms, her social media experience guiding her through the technical steps while her mind reeled from what she'd witnessed. Her best friend had just been brutalized by a school resource officer, and she held the evidence that might be Maya's only protection. As Maya sat on the hallway floor, blood drying on her forehead and bruises darkening on her wrist, she thought of her mother's federal courtroom victories, of the police officers who'd been held accountable for similar moments of violence. She thought of her little brother Elijah, who might face Officer Sullivan next year if nothing changed. Most of all, she thought about the choice she'd given Sullivan just before he grabbed her. "You are about to make a choice that will define both of our futures. I hope you choose wisely." He had chosen. Now Maya would spend the rest of her life living with the consequences of his decision, and fighting to ensure he lived with them too. Outside in the school parking lot, Angela Richardson pulled into her usual spot for parent conferences, checking her watch and gathering her briefcase. She was 3 minutes early for their 2:30 appointment, and her phone had been quiet during the drive, a good sign that Maya's day was proceeding normally. Angela had no way of knowing that in 5 minutes, when she walked through those front doors, she would discover that her daughter had just been transformed from honor student to federal case study, that her professional expertise in prosecuting civil rights violations would become painfully personal, and that the routine parent conference she'd scheduled would become the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape everything. Maya's phone, still in her blazer pocket, buzzed with a text message that would go unread for several more minutes. "On my way in. See you soon. Love you."
The notification sound was lost in the chaos of voices, radio chatter, and the digital symphony of social media alerts spreading outward from Metropolitan High School like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. By the time Angela Richardson reached the front entrance, her daughter's assault would be viewed by thousands, shared by hundreds, and commented on by people across the country who understood exactly what they were watching. Justice, Maya had learned in the past 47 seconds, wasn't just about knowing your rights. It was about surviving long enough to use them. Angela Richardson's heels clicked against Metropolitan High School's marble entrance with metronomic precision. 2:30 exactly. She prided herself on punctuality, especially for Maya's academic meetings. Her briefcase contained notes about AP course selections and college preparation timelines, the careful planning of a prosecutor who understood that her daughter's future required strategic navigation. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly during the drive, but Angela maintained her policy of not checking messages while driving. Now, as she approached the main office, she pulled out the device and saw 17 notifications from various apps, an unusual volume that made her pause. The first was a text from her colleague Marcus. "Turn on the news. High school incident involving excessive force." The second was from her neighbor. "Is Maya okay? Saw something on social media." Angela's prosecutor instincts activated before her maternal panic could take hold. She opened Jessica's livestream link with clinical precision, watching 15 seconds of footage that transformed her from concerned parent to federal case study in real time. Her daughter's voice, clear and controlled under assault. Officer Sullivan's knee on Maya's back, the sickening crash of body against lockers. She closed the video and walked into the building with the deliberate pace of inevitability itself. The security guard at the desk looked up with routine politeness that faltered when he saw her expression, controlled fury wrapped in professional composure. "I'm Angela Richardson, Maya Richardson's mother. I need to see my daughter immediately." "Ma'am, if you're here for the parent conference, there's been a slight delay. I'm also a federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights violations. Take me to my daughter, now." The security guard's demeanor shifted completely. He fumbled for his radio, suddenly understanding that whatever had happened in this building had just escalated beyond his pay grade. Assistant Principal Thornton appeared from a side hallway, his usual bureaucratic confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. He'd spent the last 10 minutes trying to manage the aftermath of Sullivan's assault, attempting to clear the hallway and confiscate student phones while the nurse attended to Maya's injuries. "Mrs. Richardson," he said with forced calm, "I understand there was a minor incident involving your daughter, but everything is under control now. Perhaps we could discuss this privately in my office?" Angela's look stopped him mid-sentence. 20 years of prosecuting police misconduct had taught her to recognize institutional damage control when she heard it. "Mr. Thornton, I've seen the video footage of Officer Sullivan assaulting my daughter. This is not a minor incident to be discussed privately. This is a federal civil rights violation, and this school is now a crime scene. Where is Maya?" In the nurse's office, Maya sat on an examination table while Mrs. Patterson cleaned the cut on her forehead and documented her injuries. Coach Jenkins stood nearby, having refused to leave until Maya's mother arrived. His presence was both protective and strategic. He understood the importance of adult witnesses in situations like this. Maya's wrist bore clear, finger-shaped bruises where Sullivan had grabbed her. Her blazer was torn at the shoulder where she'd hit the lockers. But her composure remained intact, her voice steady as she answered Mrs. Patterson's questions about pain levels and symptoms. "Maya," Coach Jenkins said softly, "your mother is here." Maya's relief was immediate and visible. Not because she'd been afraid, her mother had trained her too well for that, but because Angela Richardson's arrival meant the institutional protection that had failed her would now be replaced by federal authority. Angela entered the nurse's office and immediately shifted between her two roles. She knelt beside her daughter with maternal tenderness,
examining the visible injuries with gentle fingers while her prosecutor's mind cataloged each mark for documentation purposes. "Baby, are you okay?" Angela's voice carried love and fury in equal measure. "Tell me what happened." Maya recounted the assault with the precision of someone who understood the legal significance of every detail. Angela listened with professional focus, asking clarifying questions that would be crucial for prosecution while never breaking the emotional connection with her traumatized daughter. Principal Caldwell chose that moment to enter the nurse's office, flanked by Thornton and attempting to project administrative authority. She'd spent her career managing difficult situations through careful political navigation, but nothing had prepared her for this particular collision of institutional failure and federal oversight. "Mrs. Richardson," Caldwell began, "I want to assure you that we take student safety very seriously. We are conducting a full investigation into today's incident and will implement whatever measures are necessary to ensure this doesn't happen again." Angela stood slowly, her movement carrying the weight of someone accustomed to courtrooms where lives and careers hung in the balance. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Principal Caldwell, anything you say can and will be used as evidence in a federal civil rights investigation. I strongly recommend you contact your district's legal counsel before making any further statements." The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of classes changing, normal school life continuing, while the institution's foundation cracked beneath the weight of accountability. Angela pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. "This is Angela Richardson, Civil Rights Division. I need federal agents at Metropolitan High School immediately. We have a Section 1983 violation involving excessive force against a minor. Yes, I'll hold for the duty supervisor." As she waited on hold, Angela looked at Principal Caldwell with the expression that had intimidated defense attorneys for 2 decades. "No one leaves this building until federal agents arrive. This is now a federal crime scene, and tampering with evidence or witnesses will result in additional charges." Maya watched her mother transform their personal trauma into institutional accountability, wielding federal authority like a surgeon's scalpel. The pain in her head and wrist began to feel less like victimization and more like evidence in a case that would reshape everything. Within 30 minutes, Metropolitan High School had been transformed into a federal crime scene. FBI agents moved through the hallways with methodical precision. Their presence turned routine Tuesday afternoon into something unprecedented. Agent Sarah Chen secured the main hallway where the assault occurred, photographing the dented lockers and the blood droplets on the tile floor that told their own story. Angela Richardson stood in the main office, her federal prosecutor credentials having cleared every administrative obstacle in minutes. She maintained constant oversight of both the investigation and Maya's care. Her dual role as mother and prosecutor created a unique form of institutional pressure that school officials had never encountered. "Agent Morrison," Angela said to the lead investigator, "I need the security footage from all cameras covering the main hallway during 4th period. I also need Officer Sullivan's personnel file, including any prior complaints or disciplinary actions." Principal Caldwell watched her school being dissected by federal agents with growing panic. She'd built her career on maintaining institutional reputation, on managing problems quietly before they became public scandals. But federal investigations operated by different rules. Transparency wasn't negotiable, and cover-ups became additional crimes. Lieutenant Sarah Chen arrived expecting a routine response to support her officer. Instead, she found federal agents questioning staff members and a civil rights prosecutor who specialized in police misconduct cases. Her radio crackled with updates that made her stomach sink. Media vehicles in the parking lot, social media trending with her department's name, and supervisors demanding immediate briefings. "Lieutenant Chen, Agent Morrison said, approaching with Sullivan's personnel file. "We need to discuss your officer's history of complaints. According to these records, there have been 47 incidents involving students of color in the past 3 years." Chen's face went pale. She documented concerns about Sullivan's behavior in multiple reports, but her supervisors had consistently downplayed the issues. Now those same reports would become evidence of institutional knowledge and deliberate indifference. Officer Sullivan sat in a conference room with his union representative, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The union lawyer, James Crawford, had arrived expecting a routine administrative review, but found himself preparing for federal civil rights charges instead.
"Derek," Crawford said quietly, "the video footage is devastating. The student never resisted, never threatened you, and you used significant force against a minor. We need to discuss plea options before this gets worse." Sullivan's worldview was crumbling. He'd spent 3 years viewing students, especially black students, as potential threats requiring aggressive management. The idea that his actions could be criminal, that his authority could be questioned, had never seriously occurred to him. Reporter Marcus Washington arrived after receiving Jessica's livestream alert, his years covering education and civil rights issues having taught him to recognize significance quickly. His questions to school officials were precise and informed, forcing them to respond publicly rather than managing the narrative privately. "Principal Caldwell," Marcus said during an impromptu press conference, "were you aware that Officer Sullivan had received complaints about excessive force before today's incident? And if so, why was he allowed to continue working with students?" Caldwell's prepared statement about isolated incidents and ongoing investigations collapsed under Marcus's follow-up questions. Her 15 years of educational leadership had taught her to deflect and delay, but federal oversight and media attention made those tactics impossible. Assistant Principal Thornton made his crucial error during his interview with federal agents. Attempting to minimize the school's liability, he suggested that the incident might be resolved through a quiet settlement that would spare Maya's family the trauma of prolonged legal proceedings. "Mr. Thornton," Agent Morrison replied, "are you suggesting that the federal government negotiate away civil rights violations? Because that's not how constitutional law works." Angela overheard the exchange and provided clarification that ended any hope of institutional damage control. "There will be no settlement. Officer Sullivan violated my daughter's civil rights under color of law. That's a federal crime, not a civil dispute." Jessica Martinez found herself transformed from witness to key evidence provider. Her live stream had been viewed over 50,000 times, shared across multiple platforms, and preserved as documentation that no official narrative could contradict. Federal agents interviewed her with the seriousness typically reserved for adult witnesses in major cases. "Ms. Martinez," Agent Chen said, "your video provides crucial evidence of constitutional violations. You may be called to testify in federal court. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" Jessica nodded with remarkable composure for a 16-year-old. "Yes, ma'am. Maya's my best friend, and what happened to her was wrong. If my video helps prove that, then I'm ready to testify." Coach Jenkins's interview with federal agents revealed the institutional pressure that had enabled Sullivan's behavior. His testimony about being told to stay in his lane when concerns about student treatment arose provided evidence of systemic indifference to civil rights violations. By evening, the investigation had uncovered a pattern that extended far beyond one officer's actions. Sullivan's personnel file revealed complaints from 7 other families involving students of color, all dismissed by school administration as misunderstandings or cultural differences in approaches to authority. Dr. Rodriguez, the district superintendent, arrived to find her administration under federal investigation. Her initial instinct was institutional protection, but watching the video footage of Maya's assault forced her to reckon with what she'd allowed to happen on her watch. The U.S. Attorney's Office moved with unprecedented speed, fast-tracking federal civil rights charges against Sullivan and opening a broader investigation into discriminatory discipline patterns across the district. The Department of Education announced a Title VI investigation into whether the school system had created racially hostile environments for students. Angela stood beside Maya during the evening press conference, her daughter having insisted on speaking publicly despite the trauma. Maya's composure, her visible injuries, and her articulate description of feeling unsafe in her own school created a devastating narrative that no defense could overcome. As night fell over Metropolitan High School, the building stood transformed from an institution that had enabled systematic bias into the center of a federal investigation that would reshape educational accountability. The machinery of justice had engaged, and there would be no stopping it until every aspect of the system was examined and reformed. By the next morning, Maya Richardson's assault had become national news. The combination of clear video evidence, racial dynamics, and Angela Richardson's federal prosecutor status created a perfect storm of media attention that no institutional damage control could contain. Justice for Maya was trending on every major platform, the hashtag accompanied by Jessica's devastating footage and commentary from civil rights organizations across the country. The video was impossible to defend. Maya's compliance, Sullivan's excessive force, and the clear racial dynamics of the confrontation created a narrative that cut through typical media spin. Her calm recitation of rights while being brutalized, her mother's federal authority, and the institutional enablement of Sullivan's behavior combined into a story that demanded accountability. Angela stood on the steps of Metropolitan High School for a carefully orchestrated press conference, Maya beside her, despite Angela's maternal instincts to shield her daughter from further exposure. But Maya had insisted on speaking, understanding that her voice carried power that even her mother's federal authority couldn't replicate. "My daughter should feel safe in her school," Angela began, her prosecutor's training evident in every word. Instead, she was brutalized by an officer whose pattern of excessive force was documented and ignored by administrators who chose institutional protection over student safety.
"I want other students to know that what happened to me was wrong," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly despite her youth. "No student should be afraid of the people supposed to protect them. No student should have to perform perfect compliance to avoid being assaulted for walking down a hallway." The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Parents who had dismissed previous complaints about Sullivan as isolated incidents now recognized a systematic pattern. Students who had witnessed his aggressive behavior toward their peers found courage to speak publicly about experiences they'd previously kept private. Dr. Rodriguez faced cameras with the weight of institutional failure pressing down on her shoulders. Her initial statement defending district policies crumbled when a reporter asked if she'd actually watched the video footage. "Have you seen the assault, Dr. Rodriguez?" Marcus Washington asked during the press briefing. Because the footage shows a 16-year-old honor student being slammed into lockers and pinned to the ground for asking an officer to follow proper search procedures. Rodriguez paused, understanding that her next words would define both her career and the district's response. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted completely from defensive to accountability-focused. "I have now seen the footage," she admitted. "What happened to Maya Richardson was unacceptable. We failed her family, and we failed our community. Effective immediately, Officer Sullivan is banned from all district property. We are implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure this never happens again." The police union's response only amplified public outrage. Their statement defending Sullivan's split-second decisions under pressure ignored the video evidence showing a routine interaction escalated through racial bias. Union President Mike Torres's assertion that officers can't second-guess their training when dealing with non-compliant individuals demonstrated a complete misreading of both the evidence and public sentiment. Social media became a battleground of accountability. Jessica's original live stream was shared millions of times, accompanied by personal stories from other students of color who had experienced similar treatment.
The hashtag Metropolitan Accountability emerged alongside hashtag Justice for Maya, with current and former students documenting years of discriminatory discipline practices. Angela's federal colleagues moved quickly to demonstrate institutional support. The Civil Rights Division issued a statement emphasizing that constitutional protections applied to all Americans, regardless of age, and that federal law enforcement would pursue justice wherever civil rights were violated. But the attention came with costs. Angela's family received death threats from police union supporters who viewed federal prosecution of officers as attack on law enforcement itself. Maya found herself scrutinized by social media users who questioned whether she had somehow provoked the assault through her demeanor or responses. National civil rights organizations offered support and resources, recognizing Maya's case as emblematic of broader issues in school policing. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund announced they would monitor the federal prosecution, while the ACLU prepared litigation challenging discriminatory discipline policies across the district. Elijah Richardson, Maya's 13-year-old brother, called his mother in tears after seeing his sister's assault replayed on television news. Angela's explanation that the publicity was necessary for accountability couldn't diminish his fear about entering a system that had brutalized his sister for walking down a hallway. The evening vigil outside Metropolitan High School drew over 500 community members, their candles creating a sea of light that represented collective demand for change. Students, parents, and activists shared stories about experiences with discriminatory discipline, creating a public record of systematic failure that stretched back years. Maya spoke at the vigil with remarkable poise, her words transforming personal trauma into collective call for justice. "This isn't just about what happened to me. This is about every student who should feel safe in school, every family that deserves better from institutions meant to protect children." As media trucks lined the school parking lot and federal agents continued their investigation, Metropolitan High School stood as symbol of both institutional failure and possibility for transformation. The building that had enabled systematic bias for years now hosted federal investigators gathering evidence for comprehensive reform. The machinery of accountability had engaged with full force, and there would be no returning to the quiet complicity that had protected Officer Sullivan's pattern of abuse. Maya Richardson's courage under assault had created space for truth-telling that would reshape not just her school, but conversations about justice and institutional responsibility across the nation. 3 weeks after the assault, multiple investigations proceeded with methodical precision. Federal agents had completed their evidence gathering. The Department of Education's Title VI review was documenting systematic discrimination, and the school district faced mounting pressure for comprehensive reform. Officer Sullivan remained in federal custody after being denied bail. His history of complaints and the video evidence convinced the judge he posed a danger to student safety. Angela returned to her federal prosecutor duties while maintaining oversight of Maya's case through careful ethical walls. Her reputation as someone who didn't back down from institutional power had only grown stronger, but so had her awareness of the personal costs of public justice work. Maya was healing physically, but the emotional trauma of being brutalized in her own school required ongoing therapy and support. The school board's emergency session was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching live streams as community members demanded accountability. Parent after parent testified about their children's experiences with discriminatory discipline, creating a public record of systematic failure that stretched back years.
The testimony was devastating. Black and Latino students receiving suspensions for behaviors that resulted in warnings for white students. Officer Sullivan's pattern of aggressive interactions with students of color, and administrators who consistently dismissed complaints as misunderstandings. Dr. Rodriguez announced immediate reforms that surprised both supporters and critics with their scope. All school resource officers would be removed pending comprehensive review. Restorative justice coordinators would replace traditional disciplinary approaches. Mandatory bias training would be implemented for all staff, with ongoing monitoring and accountability measures. A student community oversight board would have real authority to investigate complaints and recommend policy changes.
"We cannot undo the harm we allowed," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying genuine remorse. "But we can ensure it never happens again by dismantling the systems that enabled discrimination and replacing them with approaches that center student well-being and constitutional rights." The announcement drew mixed reactions. Many community members remained skeptical that the same administration that had enabled Sullivan's behavior could implement meaningful reform. Others viewed Rodriguez's acknowledgement of institutional failure as the beginning of necessary transformation. Principal Caldwell and Assistant Principal Thornton were placed on administrative leave as their roles in enabling Sullivan's pattern became clear. Internal investigations revealed years of complaints that were dismissed, parents who were ignored, and staff members who were discouraged from reporting concerns about student treatment. Maya's return to school became a test of institutional change. She insisted on continuing her education at Metropolitan High rather than transferring, understanding that her presence would hold administrators accountable for their reform promises. The hallway where she'd been assaulted had been renovated, but the emotional geography remained unchanged. Most students welcomed Maya back with overwhelming support, recognizing her courage in exposing problems they all witnessed. But some resented the attention and scrutiny her case had brought, viewing her as responsible for disrupting their familiar environment. Maya navigated these dynamics with characteristic grace, but the emotional toll was significant. Jessica Martinez had emerged as a sophisticated young activist, helping organize Students for Dignity chapters that gave students formal voice in policy development. Her role in documenting Maya's assault had transformed her understanding of how individual actions could create systemic change. Coach Jenkins testified before federal investigators about the institutional pressure to ignore student mistreatment. His detailed documentation of being told to stay in his lane when raising concerns provided crucial evidence of administrative knowledge and deliberate indifference. His courage in finally speaking truth cost him professionally, but provided redemption personally. The civil lawsuits against Caldwell, Thornton, and the district moved forward simultaneously with criminal prosecution. Their settlements would include termination and permanent bars from working in education, sending clear messages about personal accountability for enabling civil rights violations. Lieutenant Chen's cooperation with federal investigators had provided essential insider documentation of concerns that were systematically ignored. Her emails and incident reports demonstrated that Sullivan's pattern was known to police supervisors who chose departmental protection over student safety. Data analysis revealed the extent of discriminatory discipline across the district. Students of color received suspensions and referrals to law enforcement at rates 4 times higher than white students for identical infractions. The statistical evidence supported what families had been reporting for years: systematic bias disguised as colorblind policy enforcement. Maya and Angela's relationship deepened as they processed the trauma together. Angela's professional expertise helped Maya understand the legal significance of her experience, while Maya's resilience reminded Angela why fighting for justice mattered beyond career advancement. Their evening conversations balanced healing with strategic planning for continued advocacy. The preliminary data from Metropolitan High's reforms showed encouraging signs. Disciplinary referrals had decreased by 40% as restorative approaches replaced punitive responses. Racial disparities and consequences were narrowing as implicit bias training and oversight mechanisms took effect. Students reported feeling safer and more supported, though full cultural transformation would require sustained effort. Dr. Rodriguez faced political challenges from board members and parents who viewed the reforms as excessive responses to an isolated incident. Her re-election campaign became a referendum on whether the community supported continued transformation or preferred returning to previous practices that had enabled systematic discrimination. The federal prosecution team prepared for trial with overwhelming evidence. But Angela understood that legal victory alone wouldn't create lasting change. True transformation required sustained community pressure, institutional accountability, and individuals choosing courage repeatedly when systems pushed toward complicity. As spring semester began, Maya prepared for Georgetown's summer program in law and social justice, the same opportunity she'd been pursuing before Officer Sullivan transformed her from ambitious student to national symbol. Her path forward was clear, shaped by trauma, but not defined by it, committed to ensuring other students wouldn't face the violence she survived. The federal courthouse in downtown Washington buzzed with anticipation as United States versus Derek Sullivan began. Media trucks lined the street, while civil rights activists and police union supporters gathered on opposite sides of the courthouse steps. Inside, the prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, chosen to avoid conflict with Angela's involvement, prepared to present overwhelming evidence of constitutional violations.
Sullivan entered the courtroom in civilian clothes, his former authority replaced by defendant status. His union-provided attorney, James Crawford, faced an impassable task, defending actions captured on crystal-clear video that had been viewed millions of times. The defense's strategy focused on portraying Sullivan as a dedicated officer making split-second decisions in challenging circumstances. The prosecution's opening statement was methodical and devastating. Chen outlined Sullivan's pattern of excessive force against students of color, his escalation of routine interactions into physical confrontations, and the institutional enablement that allowed his behavior to continue unchecked for 3 years. "Members of the jury," Chen said, "you will see video evidence that speaks for itself. Maya Richardson was walking to the library with proper authorization. She complied with every lawful request. She never threatened Officer Sullivan or anyone else. Yet he chose to brutalize a 16-year-old honor student for the crime of walking while black in her own school." The video presentation silenced the courtroom. Even after months of media coverage, watching Maya's assault in its entirety remained shocking. Her compliance, Sullivan's escalation, and the clear racial dynamics created an unassailable narrative of constitutional violation. Maya's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the prosecution's case. She walked to the witness stand with the same composed dignity that had characterized her throughout the ordeal, her voice steady as she recounted events that had transformed her life. "Officer Sullivan asked where I was going. I showed him my hall pass and explained I had a free period. When he demanded to search my belongings without justification, I politely cited school policy requiring female supervision for searches of female students." Defense attorney Crawford's cross-examination attempted to portray Maya as non-compliant and argumentative, but his questions only highlighted her remarkable composure under pressure. His suggestion that her knowledge of rights somehow justified physical assault backfired completely. "Ms. Richardson," Crawford said, "when you cited school policy, weren't you challenging Officer Sullivan's authority?" Maya's response was perfect. "I was asking him to follow the same rules he was supposed to enforce. Knowing your rights shouldn't be grounds for assault in America." Coach Jenkins' testimony provided crucial adult perspective on Sullivan's pattern. His detailed account of institutional pressure to ignore student mistreatment demonstrated systematic failure beyond one officer's actions. "I witnessed Officer Sullivan's aggressive interactions with students of color repeatedly," Jenkins testified. "When I raised concerns, I was told to focus on coaching and leave security to professionals. I was told these students needed firm handling because they came from different cultural backgrounds." Officer Chen's testimony proved devastating to any defense claims about proper procedures. Her documentation showed supervisors were aware of Sullivan's complaint history, but chose to defend rather than investigate his behavior. "We received multiple complaints about Officer Sullivan's interactions with minority students. Each time, the complaints were characterized as misunderstandings or cultural conflicts, rather than potential constitutional violations."
Jessica Martinez's testimony about filming the assault provided technical details about evidence preservation while showcasing the power of youth activism. Her decision to document rather than intervene had created unimpeachable evidence that no official narrative could contradict. Expert testimony on excessive force and racial bias in school discipline contextualized Maya's experience within broader patterns of systematic discrimination. Dr. Amanda Foster from Georgetown Civil Rights Clinic explained how unconscious bias influenced split-second decisions, making officer training and accountability crucial for constitutional policing. The defense's case collapsed under the weight of video evidence and witness testimony. Sullivan himself chose not to testify, but his recorded statements immediately after the assault revealed his continued belief that he'd acted appropriately in restraining a non-compliant individual. Crawford's closing argument attempted to generate sympathy for Sullivan's position, portraying him as a dedicated officer whose career was being destroyed by political correctness. But the video evidence made such arguments absurd. No amount of context could justify assaulting a compliant student for walking with a hall pass. Chen's closing was brief and powerful. Derek Sullivan violated Maya Richardson's constitutional rights under color of federal law. He used his position of authority to brutalize a child whose only crime was being black in a hallway. Federal law exists to protect citizens from exactly this type of abuse, and your verdict will determine whether that protection means anything. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, excessive force, and assault under federal jurisdiction. Sullivan's conviction carried a potential sentence of 3 years in federal prison and permanent ban from law enforcement. Maya watched the verdict announcement with quiet satisfaction, understanding that legal accountability was just the beginning of necessary transformation. Justice through prosecution was important, but sustainable change required ongoing vigilance and institutional reform. Angela felt pride in the legal system's function while recognizing its limitations. Her daughter's courage had created space for accountability, but preventing future Maya Richardsons would require more than criminal convictions. It would require cultural transformation that made such assaults unthinkable. As they left the courthouse, Maya was already planning her next steps. Georgetown's summer program would provide tools for continued advocacy, and her senior year would include speeches at education conferences across the country. Sullivan's conviction was victory, but the larger fight for student dignity and safety was just beginning. 6 months after Sullivan's conviction, the Department of Education's consent decree mandated comprehensive reforms across the entire school district. The agreement required measurable progress in eliminating racial disparities in discipline, implementing restorative justice practices, and creating transparent accountability mechanisms. Federal monitors would oversee compliance for 5 years, ensuring that announced changes translated into sustained transformation. Maya's Students for Dignity organization had grown beyond Metropolitan High to include chapters at 15 schools across 3 districts. Her leadership development workshops taught young activists how to document problems, engage with media, and hold administrators accountable through strategic advocacy. The organization's policy recommendations were being implemented nationwide as education leaders recognized students as essential partners in reform. Dr. Rodriguez's transformation from complicit administrator to genuine reformer was tested daily by political resistance and implementation challenges. Her re-election campaign faced opposition from board members and parents who viewed accountability measures as unnecessary disruptions. But student voices, community organizing, and federal oversight created sustained pressure for continued change. The cultural shift at Metropolitan High was measurable and significant. Suspensions had decreased by 60% as restorative coordinators worked with students to address underlying issues rather than simply imposing punishment. Racial disparities in discipline were narrowing month by month as implicit bias training and oversight mechanisms took effect. Sullivan served his sentence in federal minimum security facility, reportedly teaching GED classes and participating in rehabilitation programs.
His lawyer claimed he was reflecting on his actions and committed to making amends, but requests for meetings with Maya's family were declined. Maya wasn't ready for reconciliation conversations, though she no longer carried active anger about his fate. Principal Caldwell's termination and permanent education ban sent clear messages about administrative accountability. Her replacement, Dr. James Morrison, was hired specifically for his expertise in equity-focused leadership and restorative justice implementation. His first actions included forming student advisory committees with real decision-making authority and creating transparent complaint processes for bias incidents. Coach Jenkins found redemption in his new role as district equity coordinator, helping implement accountability measures across all schools. His transformation from complicit bystander to active advocate demonstrated how individuals could choose courage even after years of silence. His workshops for staff focused on interrupting bias and supporting students rather than protecting institutional reputation. Angela balanced her federal prosecution work with expanded advocacy for education reform. Maya's case had elevated her national profile, creating platforms to push for legislation mandating bias training and oversight in school policing. She testified before Congress about the need for federal standards protecting student constitutional rights. The ripple effects extended beyond education into broader criminal justice reform. Maya's case became template for federal prosecution of excessive force in institutional settings, while her composure under assault provided training material for de-escalation programs nationwide. Her transformation from victim to advocate inspired similar courage in other families facing institutional bias. Jessica Martinez's documentation skills and social media expertise made her sought-after speaker at youth activist conferences. Her live stream of Maya's assault was studied in journalism and civil rights classes as an example of how citizen documentation could create accountability. She planned to major in communications and law, understanding how media and legal strategy intersected in social justice work. Maya's healing journey continued through therapy, activism, and academic excellence. Her Georgetown summer program essay about transforming pain into purpose was selected for publication in the university's law review. Her college applications attracted acceptance letters from every school she applied to, with full scholarships recognizing both academic merit and demonstrated leadership. Elijah's experience entering Metropolitan High the following year contrasted dramatically with what it would have been before the reforms. Restorative coordinators, student oversight committees, and cultural transformation meant he navigated adolescence in an environment focused on support rather than surveillance. His sister's courage literally changed the world he inherited. The Consent Decree's first annual progress report documented substantial improvements across all measured categories. Racial disparities in discipline had decreased by 45%. Student surveys showed increased feelings of safety and support, and administrator training programs were being replicated in districts nationwide. Other families found courage to share their own stories of discrimination, filing complaints and lawsuits that had been unthinkable before Maya's case created space for truth-telling. The legal landscape had shifted to make civil rights violations in educational settings more prosecutable and less defensible. Maya spoke at the National Education Association's annual conference, her words reaching thousands of educators committed to creating more just learning environments. Her message balanced acknowledgement of progress with recognition that sustained transformation required ongoing vigilance and commitment. 1 year ago, I was assaulted in my school hallway for walking while black. Today, I stand before you not as victim, but as advocate for every student who deserves dignity and safety in their learning environment. Change is possible, but only if we choose courage over comfort, accountability over complicity. As her senior year approached, Maya looked forward to Georgetown's undergraduate program in government and justice, her path clear, but the larger work unfinished. Sullivan's conviction and the institutional reforms were victories, but creating education systems that protected all students would require each generation's continued commitment to justice.
The hallway at Metropolitan High, where Maya had been assaulted, was now painted with student murals celebrating diversity and dignity. New students walked those same spaces in safety her courage had secured, though many would never know the price paid for their protection. Justice, Maya had mirrored, was both moment and process, requiring initial courage to expose truth and sustained commitment to defend progress against those who preferred previous systems of inequality. 1 year after Officer Derek Sullivan slammed her into those lockers, Maya Richardson stood at the podium of the National Education Reform Conference, her voice carrying across an auditorium filled with educators, policymakers, and activists. At 18, a Georgetown freshman studying government and justice, she had transformed personal trauma into national advocacy. Accountability isn't a moment, it's a choice we make every day, Maya told the audience. Behind her, a presentation slide showed Metropolitan High's dramatic improvement in discipline statistics. Suspensions down 70%, racial disparities nearly eliminated, student satisfaction surveys at historic highs. Angela watched from the front row, her pride tinged with bittersweet recognition of how much her daughter had sacrificed to reach this moment. Maya's composure during the assault had created space for transformation, but the emotional costs remained real despite her remarkable resilience. Dr. Rodriguez had been re-elected as superintendent on a reform platform. Her transformation from complicit administrator to genuine change agent, validated by measurable progress. The federal consent decree was ahead of schedule on all compliance metrics, with other districts adapting Metropolitan's model nationwide. Elijah Richardson, now 15, navigated Metropolitan High in an environment his sister's courage had secured. Restorative justice coordinators, student oversight committees, and cultural transformation meant he experienced adolescence in a space focused on support rather than surveillance. Jessica Martinez served as Maya's campaign manager for student body president at Georgetown, their friendship deepened by shared commitment to justice. Her documentation of Maya's assault was now studied in journalism programs as an example of how citizen testimony could create accountability. Coach Jenkins had found redemption in his expanded role as regional equity coordinator, helping implement accountability measures across multiple districts. His workshops focused on interrupting bias and supporting students rather than protecting institutional reputation. Officer Sullivan remained in federal custody, his 3-year sentence serving as deterrent to other authority figures who might consider constitutional violations. His letter requesting forgiveness had gone unanswered. Maya wasn't ready for reconciliation, though she no longer carried active anger about his fate. The hallway where Maya had been assaulted was now decorated with student murals celebrating dignity and diversity. New students walked those spaces in safety her courage had secured, though most would never know the price paid for their protection. Maya's Georgetown acceptance letter sat framed in her mother's office, beside commendations for her civil rights prosecution work. Their evening conversations continued to balance healing with strategic planning for continued advocacy. Their relationship deepened by shared commitment to justice. As Maya concluded her conference keynote, she looked out at an audience inspired by her story, but sobered by recognition that the work continued. True justice isn't achieved through one victory. It's sustained through each generation's commitment to choosing courage over comfort, accountability over complicity. The standing ovation wasn't for Maya alone. It was for every student who had found voice through her example, every administrator who had chosen reform over reputation, every community member who had demanded better from institutions meant to protect children. Walking Metropolitan High's hallways that evening during a visit home, Maya moved through spaces reclaimed from fear. The building that had witnessed her assault now hosted thriving programs focused on student dignity and constitutional rights. Her transformation from victim to advocate had created ripples extending far beyond her own experience. Justice, Maya had learned, was both verdict and vigilance, requiring courage to expose truth and sustained commitment to defend progress against those who preferred previous systems of inequality. The hallway was quiet now, peaceful in ways that honor both memory and hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.